Наші горішеньки, як роса на сонці, запануєм і ми, браття, у своїй сторонці. І душу й тіло ми положим за нашу свободу і покажем, що ми браття козацького
Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and today I'm coming with you to talk about the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine and cover the Day 36 news. There has been a decent amount of developments around the country today, most of them in Ukraine's favor, and so, without further ado, let's get to the schedule for tonight's stream. First, we'll be covering the Northern Front. This will include the Kiev, Chernihiv areas, and also Gomel. We will not count that as international news. That will be considered Northern Front news today. We will then move on to the Eastern Front, and in between the transition from the Northern to the Eastern Fronts, we'll answer about 3 to 5 questions from the chat. We will then cover the Eastern Front, which includes the location unknowns, the Sumy area, and Kharkiv. Then after that, we will move on down to the Southern Front, but during the transition from the Eastern to Southern fronts, we will once again answer 3 to 5 questions from the chat, and then we'll cover all the news we've gotten here in the Southern Front of Ukraine, and then we will answer questions for the rest of the night. Also, I forgot we have a little bit of international news in Britain today, so we will cover that in kind of like one group with the Southern Front news, and then we'll go to the questions for the night. I'd also like everyone to note that if you would like to support the channel, there is the super chat option. If you want to donate to Ukraine and show your support for them, we do have a link in the description below for you to go and donate to Ukraine. And I highly suggest you do that before you donate to me first. So make sure to go do that and support Ukraine. And then if you want to support the channel and what we do and continue to help us bring out the news, then come and support the channel. So, without further ado, let's get into the news from the area around Kiev. Today, we've gotten the biggest news in the Kiev area that's come out in the past few days, where we've seen that the Ukrainians have retaken the Hostomel Airport entirely. Here's the drone footage of the airport after the Ukrainians took it. As you can see here, that is actually these aircraft. Let me clarify this just for everyone to know. These aircraft actually weren't used. I believe these are actually part of some sort of state aviation museum. So these aren't lost Ukrainian aircraft or captured Russian aircraft. These just simply were there as a museum piece before the war, and now they are being recaptured along with the airport. So I'm going to let the video continue. You may remember this from a while ago if you've been a return viewer of the stream, but this is the exact same pad that was being used to evacuate wounded and dead Russian soldiers by helicopter out of the country just about a week or 2 weeks ago, if you remember that footage. So I'm going to skip forward again. We're now panning over the hangar where the Antonov 225 was destroyed. And now they're going to pan down and show that a little bit better. As you can see there's the Antonov 122. We've known that it's been destroyed for quite some while now. And just to give you the scale of the size of the Antonov 225, these appear to be Cessna 172s. Not entirely sure if they are a Cessna aircraft. They could be some kind of Antonov kind of like copycat of a Cessna. Not entirely sure, but to me they look like Cessna 172s, and that gives you a scale of how large the Antonov 225 is. So now we're going to continue the video. If you'll also remember, right in front of this hangar here, in the lower bottom right of the screen in front of it, was where the Russians made a press, kind of a news story where they said that the Ukrainian officers ran faster than the enlisted when the VDV arrived and landed at the airfield. We know that's not the case now, and I bet you can probably make a good assumption that the Russian officers were the ones running the fastest from the Hostomel Airport, since they lost it today to Ukrainian forces. But anyways, I'm going to let the video continue. As you can see, damage extenuates around the airport into surrounding buildings because firefights have been ongoing near the airport for quite some while at the very beginning of the war, and closer near to the time that the Ukrainians have actually retaken the airport. And so that's the end of that video. But the great news is that the Ukrainians have now reclaimed the airport, which gives them a foothold on the other side, the northern side of the Irpin floodplain. So that's some very big news. We're now going to move on to the next bit of big news, where we can see that Ukrainians have gotten some spoils of war as they have pushed the Russians even further off of the Zhytomyr highway, which is called the E40, and have retaken a couple of villages in this area here around Severanivka. So I'm going to show you all the pictures that we've gotten of the supplies that they captured.
Встретились с пацанами с батальона Крым. Похоже, что они первые ворвались в Севериновку. Вон нагрузили себе полно добра, мы стоим, завидуем. Пойдем сейчас следом тоже отжимать что-то, что нам надо дальше для войны. Победа будет за нами, однозначно. Путин сдохнет. Все будет хорошо, ребята. Мы победим.
So as you see, some decent amount of equipment was captured as they pushed the Russians off the highway. Very good news. And this is something that isn't just remotely attached to the area around Kiev and the northern front. This is something that has been reflected across the entirety of the country today in Ukraine's counterattacks, but most importantly inside of the Kiev area. And we'll have to cover some more important information on the eastern side here in a minute. But before we do that, let's continue to cover the news on the northwestern side. First, we can see another video of a convoy burning. It appears that the Ukrainians ambushed them on the road and subsequently took out the entire convoy. So I'm going to let y'all see the video. And so you can see right there that the Russians had their convoy wiped out. It's good stuff to see. It's good to know that the Ukrainians are pushing them back, and they're also still destroying vehicles at an unparalleled rate, even compared to the earlier days of the war when Ukraine was defying everyone's expectations and really idea and opinion on the Ukraine armed forces and the government, and they were destroying a load of vehicles back then. It looks like they're destroying even more now. We're now going to move on to the next bit of video and picture evidence where we can see some more Russian equipment being destroyed in the northern area around Kiev. Let me make sure. Okay. You gotta be very careful with this one because it now marked it as NSFW, so maybe I just didn't pay attention to something. Now it's been deleted. So unfortunately I can't show y'all that, so if it was an SFW, it looks like I may have dodged a bullet because it won't let me show it to y'all. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of news around Moshchun, where we can see some Ukrainian heavy mortars in action outside of the city of Kiev. We're going to show you all this footage. It's very interesting to see. It looks like they're using 120mm mortars, but I'm not entirely sure as to the exact caliber. But one thing that is interesting is that it looks like they're using normal drones that you can buy from the store to operate as scouters and spotters for these mortars, which is interesting. As you can see here, they are prepping the mortar rounds to be fired. They are now taking them to the mortar. They are now adjusting the fire of the mortar. They are now loading the next one. They dropped it, and then they fired it again. So now it looks like they're using the drone that they have in the air as the spotter to see where the shots are landing. And so that's all we got of this video, is that they're using a civilian drone, which is very interesting to me because it shows that drones are starting to get a very high level of usage, both in terms of a high-end, more aircraft-like drone, down to civilian drones being used as spotters for artillery units. I find that very interesting, and you can see that the technology that the modern world is producing is starting to lead warfare to become more and more technologically based, of course, as the progression of war has always been technologically based. But it seems now that drones are adding a whole new level to what artillery is capable of, because now they don't need infantry calling in artillery. They can pretty much do the scouting and the artillery, you know, the actual barrage on their own. They can actually figure out where the shells are landing without any information from the infantry to say whether it's right or not, because they now have a drone, pretty much a spotter right there with their artillery group that can see what they're firing at to tell them if it's close or not and if they need to adjust. I find that very interesting. I think that's a huge progression in the technology for artillery units, so that way they'll be able to fire more effectively and accurately in the years to come, more so than they could have back then. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of news around Kiev, where we can see a damaged school in the northwest area of Kiev. We've seen a couple of these, but of course it shows you that the Russians have no regard for what buildings they're striking. We saw them strike a Red Cross building in Mariupol last week. Actually, I believe it was yesterday. And we can see that that doesn't stop there as they continue to attack schools across the entirety of the country. So I'm going to show you all this real quick.
Російська армія не розділяє цивільних, не розділяє військових, не розділяє дитячий заклад чи лікарня. Вона просто старає з обличчя землі все, що трапляється на її шляху. Як приклад, звичайна школа, сільська, в якій навчалися діти, в які ховалися на момент обстрілу місцеві мешканці у підвалі. На щастя, всі живі, але від школи залишились тільки стіни, і то деякі з них скоро впадуть.
Okay, I just gotta say this. This is kind of like a qualitative observation from me, but what's shocking to me is that we always say that the Ukrainians are, you know, here in the United States before the war, we were always saying, oh, you know, Eastern countries are incredibly poor and this and that and blah, blah, blah. But the thing is that this school actually looks a lot better than the school I went to here in the United States. Like, it actually has, like, walls that aren't made entirely out of cinder blocks, and things actually look pretty nice in this school, honestly. Even with the destruction happening, you can kind of tell that it was a pretty nice school beforehand, which is interesting to me.
Одного з багатьох ураганів, які потрапили не в школу, вони в село, вони зруйнували все навколо.
So that's the end of that video. As you can see, the school was entirely destroyed. Fortunately, the soldier who was pretty much doing the reporting there said that there was no one who was killed in the bombardment of the school, which is good news because I saw some footage way at the beginning of this war that showed that that wasn't the case in one area, as a nursery or some kind of kindergarten was hit and it killed a whole bunch of parents along with children. It was terrible to see, and I didn't show it on stream, but it was something that I saw and I really hated to see. Meanwhile, in other news, on the eastern side of Kiev, we can see that the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians all the way from Brovary to Novobasan. As we can see here in this footage, Ukrainians are liberating the village of Novobasan, and the Ukrainian citizens who are in this village are celebrating their liberation and cheering the Ukrainian soldiers as they pass on through. So let's take a look at this video.
Дякую, дякую. Ще бій не закінчився, це тільки ми потім прийдемо, потім. Це ще перший захід, напевно, ще будемо виходити, заходити.
На Жигулях їздять, на Жигулях, п'яні, як эти самі. Там только что в хату с пулемета прилетело. Да? Твою мать, работника нет.
It's pretty cool to see them just walk back through the town. It's just cool to know that what everyone has been saying for weeks, especially in the mainstream news, that the Russians are just going to get their act together and they're going to roll over the Ukrainians any day now. And now we can see that that's not the case, to the point that the Ukrainians are now rolling back through Ukrainian villages and liberating them from the Russians. It's such a wonderful thing to see, that the Ukrainians aren't out of this fight and they're actually reclaiming territory in a decent amount of the country now. So now we're going to move on from the Kiev area, where we can see that the Russians have been pushed very far away from the city. And that's one thing I don't like, is that the news keeps on making it sound like, whenever they report, they're like, we are going to the outskirts of Kiev, where the Ukrainians are fighting the Russians. And if you look at a map, the outskirts of Kiev is on this road here, the T1027, the E373 as well. And when you say the outskirts of Kiev, that's what most people would probably envision. They're not going to envision Moshchun and Dimidiv and other cities like that, and Hostomel. Those aren't the outskirts of Kiev. Those are almost entirely different cities. So I don't know why the news says stuff like that. I think it's dishonest, and they're just trying to hype up their ratings and viewership by making people think, oh, it's a really close-pitched war. But right now, the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians so far back from the capital, I don't even really think Kiev is technically a front anymore. It's more like just the northern area of the country, the northeastern area of the country, more so than the Kiev/Chernihiv front. Now it's really just the Chernihiv and northern front. So now that we've covered all the news in the Kiev area, we're now going to move on to Chernihiv, where we've seen nothing happen at all. This is something that we've been seeing often, and now we know that the Russians are withdrawing troops from the area, which suggests to me, and I know a lot of people are about to say this, and I just have to say at this point, I just don't really know where anyone's coming from saying this anymore, that, oh no, the Russians just are holding off right now because they're really thinking this through, and they're just sitting there and they're coming up with a brilliant plan, and once they come up with this brilliant plan, they're going to roll over the Ukrainians and the war will be over. You know how many times, to people who may say that, do y'all know how many times people have told me that? People told me that all day, every day, when the 40-mile-long convoy was sitting on the P-56. Every single day, people would say, oh, just wait and see. They're just sitting there planning. But once they get done planning, that convoy is just going to roll straight down the road and into Kiev, and they're going to win. And that never happened. The convoy fell apart. And that's exactly what's happening now. The Russians just keep on visibly having failure after failure over and over and over, and there's absolutely nothing anyone can tell me at this point to make me think or even entertain the idea at this point that the Russians actually will be able to rebound from this. Every single day, things keep getting worse and worse for them, and there's no sign of this turning around back into their favor. The situation keeps deteriorating for them. And so, to get back to the Chernihiv news, so because of that, there has been no news around Chernihiv. I'm guessing because they haven't been able to do anything. Their logistical supplies have been run thin. Nothing is going on at all up there, and the Russians have stalled. And I'm sure that the Ukrainians are pushing out of the city because we've gotten a little bit of information to suggest that they're now pushing the Russians back up there as well. To also show that convoys are leaving the northern area in a pretty sizable amount. We'll revisit what sizable is here in a second. Here's a video of a Russian convoy driving back into the city of Gomel, which is a pretty decent distance from the Ukrainian border, some say 20 miles. So these units have actually driven a large portion of roadway back into the city of Gomel. I don't really know why. I think there is a railhead down here in Bashtan. There's a railhead. And there's also, a bit of railroad that went into Ukraine, but we know that those railheads were destroyed completely. So this is suggesting to me, because to kind of carry on with some other thoughts and ideas, this is suggesting to me that they're not repositioning these forces. If they were, they wouldn't have driven them all the way into Gomel. They would have loaded them up onto a train much sooner, and they would have already had them on the way on the long trip around the entirety of Ukraine through Russia down to the southern front to help push objectives down there. So I don't think they're repositioning. I think these troops are being withdrawn from the northern front, and they're just going to wait out the war up here until they're needed to fill in gaps that the Russians have suffered in the northern front again. I think that's what's going on. But anyways, here's the video of the convoy that is in Gomel. BMD-4s. A tractor that's obviously not part of the convoy. More BMD-4s. But you can see that this is clearly a BTG because there's a large amount of armored personnel carriers in this convoy, which suggests this is the actual fighting force. Probably an entire BTG here because they have about 30 APCs and 10 main battle tanks per BTG. But you can see right there that there is a mass of APCs in this one video. I'm assuming that this may be the entire force of an intact BTG that's moving through Gomel, which tells us that in this one video, at least one BTG has driven all the way from the front near Chernihiv all the way to Gomel, which is probably an entire distance of around 70 miles, which is a very long drive for armored units to take if they're supposed to be repositioned around the country, because it burns up a lot of supplies. Those tanks and APCs take a lot of gas to move. So I think they're actually being sent to some kind of FOBs that have been set up by the Russian supply camps, whatever you want to call them, in southern Belarus, and they're just going to sit there until the Russians take enough losses in the northern front that they'll then require more reinforcements, and then they'll just send them back into the northern front to fill in those gaps. That's what I'm kind of thinking at this point. But as far as the news is gone, we've actually covered everything in the northern front, and so now we're going to start moving on to the eastern front, the location unknown Sumy and Kharkiv area. But before we do, we're going to take some questions from the chat. And so what do we got, Matthew?
Okay, so good evening again, chat. It's good to be with everybody again. First up tonight, we have a $20 donation from S. Moore. And thank you very much, S. Moore. I think you were on the channel last night as well. Thank you for your continued support. They say, the blue-eyed sockeye says Putin needs to live with the fishes and ask why was the huge dam/reservoir in eastern Ukraine blown up? Here's $20 to have a Gulf prawn boil and share with your staff.
Well, thank you very much for the support, and we will look into having one of those. But the reason why the dam in eastern Ukraine was blown up, and I assume you're talking about the one that was around Crimea, it was blown up because the Ukrainians built that dam in response to the Russian annexation of Crimea, and so the Ukrainians thought, well, if you're going to annex Crimea, then there's no need for you to have Ukrainian water, and so they dammed the river, and they stopped the Crimeans from getting pretty much their entire water supply from Ukraine. So the Russians in this invasion have blown up the dam to try and return the water supplies back, to Crimea, to try and make sure that they can continue their agricultural endeavors, their agricultural industry in Crimea as best as possible. Thank you very much once again for being a return donor. I know you're the sockeye salmon guy. Like, you're the one who is constantly doing that. It's a funny joke, and I thank you very much for the support. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and the next question of the night is from Yachtmaster, putting in a donation of $20. Thank you for your support as well. They say, I just found out that the founder of the Wagner Group, Dmitry Yudkin, is actually Nazi Wagner, is nod to Hitler's favorite composer. Putin is literally using Nazis to terrorize Ukrainians. You just can't make this stuff up.
Yes, that is true. The Wagner Group is pretty much a group of Russian neo-fascists. I'm not really sure if I'm allowed to say the other term on YouTube without them coming and grabbing me out of my basement. But yes, that is actually what they are. They're just a group of neo-fascists. And so it's very interesting to me that Putin is saying he's going to de-fascify, to try and get creative and explain the terms, but de-fascify Ukraine, but at the same time he sent in the Wagner Group, which is a fascist group. So it's very interesting to me, the silly political game being played here, because if it was obviously the case of Russia wanting to try and expel the world of fascists, then why are they employing and operating a fascist military unit inside of Ukraine? As far as I know, the Wagner Group was actually wiped out within the first week of the war. From what I was told, they were sent in to Kiev as kind of like spies and saboteurs to kill Zelensky, and the Ukrainian government said that they had killed all the members of the Wagner Group that were kind of traveling around Kiev trying to find a way to assassinate the president. That's at least the story I've heard. I haven't actually been able to get that confirmed, and I haven't seen any proof that that was the Wagner Group that was kind of traveling around being the spies and saboteurs and such. But one never knows. That may actually be the story. It may not be, but I'm going to wait until the end of the war to try and get some hardcore and solid information on that and see if that really was the case or not. But I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers your question in a way. And so that being said, we're moving on to the last question of this segment, and then we're going to start covering the news from the Eastern Front.
All right, and real quick, I just want to mention that a couple of viewers have mentioned that Wagner Group is actually pronounced Wagner Group, since they're German, so I guess that would be the case. So the next question is from Daniel McNamara, who puts in a donation of $10 and says, thanks for putting all the effort into the streams, and Slava Ukraine.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. I'm glad that you enjoy the effort I put into it. It is, of course, a 7-hour job a day, and doing that 7 days a week, although I'm now doing it 6 because I'm taking Mondays off. And I want everyone to know that Mondays I will not be streaming anymore. I'll be taking those days off to make sure that I don't get burned out on this thing like I was during the first month, so that way I can make sure to kind of like collect my thoughts, make sure I can stay energetic and stay rested enough to make sure that I'm not just getting worn down. But I thank you very much for the support once again, and I do love that a lot of people enjoy this channel. There's a load of them you can watch out there, and yet y'all have come to my channel and chose to watch my content instead of anyone else's, and I'm incredibly honored that all of y'all have come here to watch my channel instead of anyone else's, because it tells me that y'all really enjoy my content, and I find that to be incredibly, I'm just very honored that everyone thinks that about my channel. And so I thank you all once again for the support, and I thank you very much for the super chat as well, because it helps this channel to continue running. And so that being said, we've covered all the questions in this segment, and now we're going to move on to the Eastern Front, starting off with the location unknowns. Today we've had a decent amount of location unknowns, not a high amount, not a low amount, about 12 of them. But we're going to start off with the first location unknown, where we can see Russian troops endure a barrage. I'm going to let y'all see this video. It's pretty interesting. They're actually hiding all of their vehicles behind a residential building, but this will not save them from Ukrainian artillery. So as you can see there, they're just showing the vehicles behind the building, and now the artillery is raining in. Accurately, it doesn't look like it's actually hitting out any of the buildings they're around. And it looks like now, I'm not really exactly sure where the crews are, we can't see them. It looks like the tanks are just sitting there, actually. It doesn't look like any of the crews are moving to their vehicles or trying to move them or anything. Maybe they've abandoned them and started hiding in the buildings themselves. And we see here another artillery explosion rocked one of the main battle tanks. It appears that it's maybe a T-64 T-80 series. Not entirely sure about that yet, but we're going to see when the smoke clears if that is the case. And if they've actually... Well, actually, that's the end of the video, huh? Nonetheless, we can see there, not that I can tell if any of the vehicles were actually destroyed, that Ukrainian artillery did attack a Russian unit of vehicles hiding in some buildings, and it looks like they may have caused some damage, but we're not entirely sure how much damage. So I can't really say much on that video, but we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we see the Ukrainian Air Force operating at low altitudes. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to mute this video because it plays copyrighted music. Let me make sure to let it load first. But nonetheless, this appears to be an Su-25 that's operated by the Ukrainians. And so I'm just going to let the video play because it's pretty neat. This also gives us a little bit of evidence, this video here, that the Ukrainian Air Force does exist and hasn't been shot down entirely like some people try to say. So that's something good to know. But now moving on to the next bit of news. A lot of people used to talk about the ghost of Kiev, and then the ghost of Kiev kind of died in everyone's memory in a way. Everyone just stopped talking about him. Everyone moved on. But I have a little bit of a glimmer of hope for everyone. I'm not really sure if this is the ghost of Kiev, because of course everyone started calling every MiG-29 the ghost of Kiev, and we know that all of them aren't. But we've seen a lone MiG-29 from the Ukrainian side flying very low to the ground in this video. I'm going to let y'all see it. Don't know if this is the ghost of Kiev. I don't even know if he's really real, because that became a whole ordeal if he was actually real or not. We're not entirely sure as to that either. But as you can see here, here is a Ukrainian MiG-29. Filmed today. Also, some people may ask, are like the engines of this MiG-29 damaged or like really smoky? The answer to that is no. MiG-29s burn poorly. The engines burn poorly, and so they leave a whole bunch of soot in the exhaust of the engines. And so regardless if they have afterburners on or off, they look kind of like a steam train nearly that's oil-fired operating in the air, because they just emit so much exhaust from the engines. It's really crazy. And also, some of y'all are probably wondering why the middle part of this video is blurred out, and that's for reasons so that way people can't geolocate the video. So that's why the middle is blurred out. Sorry about that if that was kind of a little disorienting, but then again, we want to make sure that no one knows the exact location of where this was if there's any landmarks in the video. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we see an explosion occur behind some Ukrainians that are on the side of a road. It appears from the explosion itself that it may have been a vehicle that got hit and was torn to shreds right behind the Ukrainians. I'm not sure if there was any crew inside of it or if it was even a Ukrainian vehicle. All we know is that it did look like there were fragments of a vehicle in the explosion flying over them. But here's the video. And so I'm going to rewind this here real quick so that way we can see it again. Kind of see what I'm talking about. Right there, that's actually perfect that I put it back at this point. Right there is a shard of metal. And based off the explosion, let's see if we can get that a little bit better. You know, there's kind of looks like a door frame. You know, I might be wrong, but it kind of does look like it was the pieces of a vehicle that was blown up, and it just had pieces of it flying everywhere. So I'm not really sure if it is a vehicle, but my assumption is that it may have been a vehicle, and considering that the Ukrainians are on the side of the road, it is probably a Ukrainian vehicle. Hopefully no crew was inside of it, and they had all dismounted the vehicle and were outside of it. But nonetheless, that's all assumptions, and we don't really have a lot of information going off of that video. We're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we're going to see the Russian truck blow up on a road. I think this video also has copyrighted music. Yes, I do think it does. Let me make sure. Okay, it doesn't. This is completely mute. So the Russian truck, it appears to be a fuel truck, is moving down the road, and then bam, a bomb goes off, and the fuel in the back of the truck catches on fire, but the truck continues to roll. I'm not sure if the driver was killed in the explosion, but it looks like that truck is not in any good shape to continue rolling, and it looks like the fuel in the back of the truck is now caught fire, and will probably burn the entire vehicle out within minutes. We're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see Ukrainians destroy a Russian vehicle. Here's the footage of that. So we can see them looking off into the distance. You can kind of see the Russian vehicles right here moving down the road. But they are a very long distance away from where they are. We can see an explosion resound on the road. It appears that one of the vehicles has now caught fire in the convoy and is continuing to roll with the rest of the convoy behind it and some of them in front. And the convoy is not stopping at all. And it appears that the burning vehicle is not stopping either, as it appears to continue rolling on forward. This is kind of a typical Russian tactic. I believe it's a typical worldwide tactic that if there's an ambush on a convoy, they just try to keep on moving, because stopping will pretty much get them stuck in this ambush and they'll get killed, is probably the strategy behind keeping on moving even if a vehicle is destroyed or lost. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we're going to see Ukrainian ATGM hit a Russian tank. We've seen a lot of this. But it's always good to see that the Ukrainians keep on taking out Russian tanks. This one appears to have been abandoned, or maybe the crew was taking a break. You can also see a javelin cage on this tank here, so I think it's probably... well, a lot of them had javelin cages on them. I'm not really sure exactly what kind of tank this is, but we do know that it may be a T-72 or a T-80 series. But you can see there that the ATGM hit the side of the vehicle, and the vehicle has probably now been disabled. Great to see. I always love to know that the Ukrainians continue to hammer out the Russian vehicles, the losses, and stealing them with farm implements. And so we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see another destroyed Russian vehicle. We've been getting loads of this stuff. I'm not exactly sure where this occurred. Of course, it's a location unknown, so that's kind of self-explanatory. But it does appear that wherever this is, it's a fuel vehicle. It's not the one that we saw in the last video get hit and burn. So apparently it's an entirely different fuel vehicle. But we can see here that it apparently got hit and it's now burning. Actually, I'm going to correct what I said. This actually looks like a BMP-2. Now whatever's left of it looks like a hunk of junk. As you can see, the fire is still burning in the distance, and the smoke is kind of covering a bit of the farmland. Looks like there's actually some little farmhouses out here. That's a pretty nice looking place. I wish that this war hadn't happened, and I just seen like videos of the Ukrainian landscape, because honestly it's very pretty. It looks a lot like the American Midwest in a way. And maybe in the future I can travel over there and do some stories and actually see the land and meet the people in the process, because it looks like a very interesting place. Nonetheless, that's the end of that video. We're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see some footage of pro-Russian forces, and I'm just going to let y'all see the footage. They look like a bunch of homeless people. As you can see here, they're rummaging through what appears to be like knapsacks and shopping bags. And they have a whole bunch of mismatched equipment. Also, I don't want to be wrong, but that looks like a PTRS-41 from here. If it is, that is embarrassing, because those are World War II vintage, and they didn't even work against German tanks during the war. Oh, we can see another Mosin Nagant here with a PU 3.5 magnification scope. So that's once again another World War II vintage weapon. These people, rather than their body armor and their helmets, look like they came straight out of World War II or just afterwards, because they're using nothing but World War II vintage equipment. This is the kind of stuff you would see in a museum or a gun show here in the United States.
Уважаемый, а зачем вы привязали веревку? Надо.
Another Mosin. I'm not sure if that's the exact one. Well, actually, it may be different, because look, that's the front of another Mosin. They're giving these guys nothing but Mosins. I'm going to assume, okay, and this is an assumption kind of in the benefit of the Russians, that this has got to be some DPR or LPR troops, because I mean, like, while I have disparaging comments and think that the Russian military is not as modernized as they claim, some of their units are so backwards that the Russian military is still issuing Mosin Nagants and PTRS-41s to their soldiers. I mean, I find that very hard to believe. I may be wrong, though, and if I am, that's actually going to be the first thing I'm shocked by in terms of Russian incompetence or the lack of technology. That would be the first time I've ever seen it actually happen inside of Russian forces to that degree. So that would actually shock me. We're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see the Ukrainians destroy the Gaz-3344. This is a lot like the same vehicle that we saw a while ago called a DT-30, which is a larger version. This isn't going to load. We're going to give up on that. Nonetheless, I'll just pull up a picture of a Gaz-3344 for you. Gaz-3344. Currently, that's not pulling up. Let me try that again. Gaz-3344. Nope, it's not pulling up. All right, we'll move on to the next one. Here in the next video, we can see a Russian had stolen jewelry. This Russian was captured, and they started searching his pockets, and you can see they throw out ring after ring out of this guy's pockets. Just take a look at this. This is all jewelry. So this guy's been going around to random civilians and just grabbing the jewelry off of them.
Крестик, сука, блядь. Смотри, крестик ему понравился. Да, крестик такие.
Now, this is something similar to what you would see the Germans doing in World War II to the Jews, where when they put them inside of the camps, they would have them, they would remove all of their gold teeth, all of their jewelry. Also, that was when they were getting them out of the ghettos. They would go through and take all their personal possessions and sell them. They would shave their heads and sell their hair. And the Germans pretty much treated the Jewish people as kind of like a commodity resource. Like, they would just take everything from them, sell it. You know, if it was a precious metal, it would be sold. Wedding rings and such would be sold. Their hair would be sold. All their personal possessions would be sold. And it looks like the Russians are taking upon themselves and taking actions as individuals in the Russian military to go through Ukrainian villages and steal jewelry off of the local Ukrainians, so that way when they go home they can try and sell all the stuff for a decent little penny of profit. But it looks like this guy isn't going to be getting any of that kind of luck, and it looks like this may be held against him as far as the Ukrainians are concerned, because he's pretty much stealing from the local populace for no reason. It wasn't any necessity like food or water that he was stealing, it was jewelry. So obviously you can tell that the end goal of this was to try and make some money at the end of this war.
Смотри, крестик ему понравился. Ну да, крестик такие.
Just sickening. You would think that someone would actually stop a thief like that somewhere, but nonetheless they didn't. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news. Actually, the last bit, and we can see that the Ukrainian farmers are not only stealing the tanks and multiple other systems like anti-aircraft systems, APCs, and such. They have also appeared to have planted last year, I'm assuming, the saplings of missiles, and now the missiles are ripe and they're harvesting them in the fields. Let's check out this video, because it's very interesting to see that they have had a decent amount of success with this year's harvest. They said it couldn't be done, but it looks like the Ukrainian genetic engineers have done it.
Ёб твою мать! Русский корабль, иди нахуй.
That looks like a very good harvest of missiles. I'm not exactly sure which kind that is. But nonetheless, I think the Ukrainians are onto something here, and that they could probably start selling organically grown Russian missiles and probably make a decent profit off of it. Beside the joke, it is very interesting to see that they actually saw this missile in the field. Let's go back to the beginning. Well, it looks like it made a little small crater, but, you know, considering that it's a war, it's wild that someone actually looked at this one specific tiny crater in the middle of this farm field and said, hey, look, there's a missile in that, let's pull it out. And I'm surprised that they would pull it out. You'd think that they'd be a lot more careful about that, considering that, you know, a missile is known to explode. And so, you know, my concern if I was over there would be, what if I pulled that thing out and it blew up in my face? But nonetheless, obviously, they weren't scared of doing that. And then they pulled the thing out, which was very interesting. So now we're going to move on to the rest of the news around the Eastern Front, starting with Sumy. Once again, I bet y'all are all surprised to hear this little speech, but there's been nothing that's come out of Sumy. Sumy's been incredibly quiet for the past week or two. It appears that not much is going on there, and now Troishtinets has fallen quiet as well. So we don't really know how successful the Ukrainians have been, because last time there was a silence in some areas of the front. We then saw later on that the Ukrainians had actually made massive ground in those areas. So I don't know if this silence is because the Ukrainians are trying to keep quiet the amount of success they're having in this area. Don't really know. All I know is that it's quiet, and so far the front lines have remained unchanged, and I have nothing to report on this area. So as far as this channel is concerned, everything is status quo in the Sumy Troishtinets area. We're now going to move on further south on the Eastern Front to the area of Kharkiv. Once again, we've gotten no news from the area of Kharkiv, and I did see some maps, although I don't cross-reference my maps a lot. I saw some maps reporting that the Ukrainians have pretty much pushed the Russians off the ring road around Kharkiv, and have also made it all the way down to Kyiv, down here in the southeastern area near the city. I haven't been able to confirm these reports with video evidence, and so the front lines have remained unchanged at the moment in these areas. But nonetheless, that's what I've heard, and if that's true, that's massive news, because that means the Ukrainians have made a large amount of ground around the Kharkiv area, which is considered one of the major fronts in the Ukrainian war. The two major areas in this war was Kiev and Kharkiv, and it looks like the Russians are trying to change the narrative now and make it seem like Kiev wasn't a primary target, but we could see during the first weeks of the war, pretty much the whole entire first month, that Kiev and Kharkiv were the primary targets of the Russians. And so now it looks like they're losing on all fronts, especially the ones that mattered, those two. And so now it looks like the Russians are just trying to make some kind of reprisal attacks. And we can see here that they've done a really weird one, and they've attacked a cow stockade and killed hundreds of cows. There was another picture of a whole bunch of dead cows that have been killed in this explosion, but I didn't want to get that one because I felt like it was a little too graphic. So anyways, here's the video of the destroyed cow stockade. As you see, these cows are assessing the damage themselves and trying to figure out what is going on here. I bet they're probably trying to wonder why so many of them went to slaughter early. So that's something kind of weird. Can't really tell what that is. I thought it was a calf for a minute. But as you can see, the stockade was destroyed fairly well, and I hate to see that because you know that such a level of damage and destruction. And when you see the video of how many cows they buried in a single pit, it was loads. It was about hundreds of them. You've got to assume that that will have some kind of slight impact on the Ukrainian food supply issues after the war. But as of now, we really can't measure how bad that is and how much it'll be reflected post-war. I'm sure that a lot of countries will be more than happy to export their food stuffs, like the United States, to Ukraine. So I don't really know if it will have a major effect, but we know that at least as far as locally, this will have a major effect on the Ukrainian cattle industry and cattle supply. So that's actually all the information that we've gotten out of the Kharkiv area, which is really crazy to me because the Eastern Front has been so quiet for so long. Like, the Eastern Front is the quickest one to move through once we get past the location unknowns. So with that being said, we've actually covered all the news in the Eastern Front now as well. And before we move on to the Southern Front, we're going to answer a couple more questions from the chat. And so what do we got, Matthew?
Okay, so at the moment we currently have about 15 to 20 super chats in the queue. So next up we have one from Vince Weber with a donation of $20. He says, "Your knowledge of logistics is great. Can you share your knowledge of the major rails and ports that Russia could use to support a front? Does the Belarus sabotage of rails truly make a difference?"
The Ukrainian sabotage of railroads does make a huge difference because the Russians and the Ukrainians use the same gauge of railroads. I'm kind of a railroad geek, so this is something that I kind of look into a bit, at least on the overall functioning of a railroad. I can't tell you every single kind of locomotive or rolling stock there is out there, but the Russians and the Ukrainians use the same gauge. It's like 7 feet wide. I think it's a huge gauge. But nonetheless, that's the gauge that they use. And so the major railroad hubs, if they wanted to actually operate some kind of railroad logistical operations inside of Ukraine, are in the major cities. Major cities, of course, have to have massive railroad logistics to support the populations, especially during Soviet times, because the Soviets relied heavily on railroads. And so you can see here on this map, you can see the railroad logistical structure in a way. Sorry for kind of like butchering my way through that. But you can see here a large rail yard. You can also see up here what appears to be a secondary and tertiary rail yard, as well as what appears to be a railroad station inside the city of Kharkiv. I'm assuming that that's a station and not another yard. And then we have another yard up here. And so you can see that most of the major rail yards, which are very important because that's where you marshal supplies to move from place to place, are inside of the major cities like Kharkiv, Kiev, and so on. So if they want to control the railroad logistics and make sure that their units are well supplied, it's really actually just very important that they capture these major cities as a whole, because then that gives them major railheads to operate units out of and make sure that they're well supplied. So as far as identifying major railheads for the Russians to use, really all I'd have to do is name off most of the major Ukrainian cities like Chernihiv, Kiev, Sumy, Kharkiv, and that may be also another reason why the Russians targeted these cities first. It may have not been because they thought that if they captured these cities, the war would be over. Maybe it was because they knew that there were major railheads in those cities, and considering that they rely so much on the railheads to ensure that their military can keep running, they knew they had to capture these cities to make sure that supplies ran incredibly well. As far as ports, there's very few that the Ukrainians still control that aren't inside of Crimea. There's Mariupol, Berdyansk, and Odessa. Those are really the major three that are on the sea. Then there's two that are kind of on the rivers. There's Kherson, which is the gateway to the Dnieper River, and then there's Mykolaiv, which is on the Ba River, but is also equally important because it's used to harbor ships as well. So those are kind of like all of your major port cities and railheads. And so I hope that answers the question in a way. And I thank you very much for the question. I'm glad that you're focusing on logistics because I think it's one of the most important parts of a war. But unfortunately, I haven't been able to talk about it much lately because there just hasn't been much to say. I kind of covered that they were lacking logistically at the beginning of the war, and that was really all that I could say about it. There wasn't really much to add on, so I haven't been able to say anything else about it. So I thank you for bringing it up, allowed me to touch on it for a bit. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a very generous donation from 3ID Raven of $100, and they say, "Keep up the good work. Slava Ukraine."
Goodness gracious. Thank you very much for the support. It means a lot to me, and it makes sure that this channel will keep running. And so people like you, kind of like how PBS says, we want to thank you for supporting this channel. I want to thank you for supporting this channel and helping us to continue running it. It means a lot to me, and that will ensure that the news can get out for a long, long time. And so I thank you very much once again for the support. It means a lot to me, and Slava Ukraina. And that being said, we're moving on to 2 more questions, and then we're going to start covering the news from the Southern Front.
And our next question up for the night is from Joshua Guillaume. He puts in a donation of $50 and says, "Is there any news as to whether or not Kherson has been liberated? I've heard supposedly from the Pentagon via mainstream media that Russia is no longer in full control of the city."
Oh, you're spoiling it. Yeah, we do have some news. Of course, that's covered in the Southern Front news, so to answer that question now, we know that the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians all the way back into the city of Kherson, but as of now, we're not entirely sure if the city has fallen back into Ukrainian hands. The news coming out from that area is kind of a little iffy and a little sketchy at most because the information isn't coming out clearly, but we do know that the Ukrainians, to touch on the Southern news a little bit right now, have liberated 11 more villages right outside of Kherson today, so to answer that question, we know that they've been pushed all the way back to Kherson right now, but we're not sure if the city has been taken or is only half controlled by the Russians at this point. So we'll have to wait and see in the coming days if we can get some more clear information on that, but I thank you very much for the support. That, once again, is a huge help to this channel and ensures that we'll be able to keep on running. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And real quickly, I just want to correct a pronunciation. I said 3ID Raven. It's actually 3-eyed Raven. Thank you for Mark Bohaichuk and several others pointing that out. That's my fault. The next one is from Joe with a donation of $25, and there's no comment. So thank you very much for your support, Joe. As always, thank you for the donation. It helps us keep running the channel. The next one up is from Gandalf TW, who puts in a donation of $10 and says, "Thanks for the continued news coverage and the time you put into it. Taking Mondays off is a great idea, and it allows viewers to get some time off too. Slava Ukraine."
I do have to agree, and Slava Ukraina. Taking a little bit of time off of this war is a good thing for everyone, really, because it can get exhausting to look at the amount of suffering and damage that's going on in Ukraine every single day and kind of have that on your minds. So I do have to agree that taking a break off, at least for y'all, is a good thing, and it's a good thing for me too, because it allows me to keep up a level of energy that I like to keep up in my streams instead of just like dragging on and like pretty much being a dead corpse being dragged through the news. So I thank you very much for agreeing with me that taking Mondays off is a good thing. Thank you very much. And so that being said, that was the last question of that question segment, and we're now going to return to the news of what's going on in the Southern Front. To start off in the area of Luhansk, we can see separatist artillery in action once again from the LPR. I'm going to show this video. They're using a 152 millimeter artillery piece. I'm going to show you the video. This guy thinks he's really cool. He was like, "Oh, let me get the snapshot." Like he gets to shot the artillery piece. Then he zooms out the camera and flings it in front of his face. I mean, like he thinks that looks cool, but honestly, for some reason, this is kind of a little cringe. We're gonna watch that one more time just because it's a little funny.
Боевая работа артиллерии Луганской республики. Уничтожаются огневые позиции противника на северо-донецком направлении. Огонь! Работа идет напряженно, не останавливаемся ни днем, ни ночью. Вываливаем стальную нашу месть на врага. И много ребят, которые достойны наград, они будут продолжать. Это правое дело, это наше правое дело. Бог с нами, мы победим.
So that's the end of that video. And that's really all there is to see and say about it. It's kind of like the usual artillery videos. We get loads of them from the DPR and LPR. I think it's the only thing they do that they're proud of, and so it's the only thing that they can broadcast and show. And so, that being said, we've actually covered all the news from the Donbass area today. And this is the area that a lot of people are saying that the Russians are going to try and capture. And for everyone to know, the Donbass area is the Luhansk and Donetsk regions, which you can see outlined here in kind of like the squiggly little dotted lines. You can see Luhansk up here. You see Donetsk down here. And so a lot of people are saying that they want to, the Russians want to capture the Donbass in its entirety, pretty much capture all the regional borders of it, and then say we've achieved our objectives. That's what everyone's saying now. I don't think that's the case. I think that they may try and change their strategy towards that a little, but I don't think that's going to become their primary goal. So we're now going to move on to the news in Mariupol. We have gotten loads of news today. There hasn't been much good news coming out of the city. As usual, the city of Mariupol has been a really rough place for the past month. They've really not had a let up from the fighting or the suffering. So we're going to get through this news, and I'm going to show you all some of the unfortunate things that have been happening inside the city over today. The first thing we can see is a group of Chechens. Now, this may be the only funny thing we got today. Group of Chechens trying to be TikTok stars, and they get attacked by Ukrainian mortars and have to duck and dive and kind of look a little silly in the middle of their TikTok. So I'm going to show you all this video. So you can see they took a little dive to the ground there. This guy looks like he's just absolutely about to have some kind of panic attack. Just look at him. I mean, like, they're trying to be all cool. I mean, you know, obviously, I'm not saying that the guy is a little dumb for having a panic attack, but look at him beforehand. They're trying to walk around and act like they're all cool and nonchalant. Yeah, we're taking Mariupol. What about it? And then, bam, a mortar hits near them, and this guy goes into panic attack and starts crying. I mean, like, that's not a good look, you know. Just to watch this one more time. I just gotta say, that's not a good look for someone to sit there and try and look cool and then fall to the ground and start crying. Not a good look. We're now going to move on to the next bit of Mariupol news. I'm sorry if I get used to saying location unknown news. There's just so much of it. Nowadays, people don't report locations as well as they used to, which is understandable because people are kind of getting fatigued over there and don't really feel like saying where it is. Now moving on to the next bit of news, we're going to see a reporter from the Russian side passing through some gunfire in the city. I'm going to show you this video. This guy appears to handle it a little bit better, but anyways, here's the video.
Все живые? Да. Давай на 3. Раз. 3.
So you see, this guy didn't have exactly a fun time in the press that day. I think the little whistling noise that we heard there for a second that kind of sounded like a bird, I think that was a bullet passing over his head really close because they make kind of a buzzing / whistling sound. But let me go back and make sure that I'm saying that right. Yeah, that sounded like a bullet in a way. So I'll say that that's probably a bullet that was passing over his head. Luckily, he didn't hit the ground and start crying like the Chechen, who's supposed to be, according to the Russians, the badass of their military. He just kind of sat there for a second, was like, oh, we're getting shot at, and then he got up and just started running, which makes a lot more sense than falling to the ground and crying when you're supposed to be a tough guy, according to the Russians. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of news in Mariupol, where today we can see the Russians once again attacking the metallurgical plant that is near the port of the port area, the docks of Mariupol, and they were dropping more bombs inside the metallurgical plant. I'm going to show you all that video real quick. The Azov battalion has been holed up in this metallurgical plant called the Azovstal for quite some while, pretty much since the beginning of the siege, and it appears that the Russians have not been able to uproot them from these positions at all, and they continue to try and mercilessly bombard them into being uprooted from their positions and routed. So here's the video of that. See there, an explosion rocks this little building. I'm not exactly sure if it's a small storage building or some kind of administrative office, but it rocked that small little building. I'm assuming that there were Azov soldiers inside of it. Hopefully they were safe and just lightly injured or not injured at all at best, and hopefully none of them were killed, because they've been holding that city for an incredibly long time, and when you're in a siege, losing soldiers is much more serious than it is ever, because there's no chance of replenishing or reinforcing units once they suffer losses and casualties. We're now going to move on to the next bit of news inside of Mariupol, where we can see a Russian tank in action in the city. We've seen a decent bit of this footage, but once again we got some more today, and this appears to have been taken from the turret of the tank. So I'm going to let y'all see this video in its entirety. Once again, firing into civilian buildings. I'm not really sure if there was combatants in them or not, but it doesn't look like in this video they were taking fire or got any suggestion that there was enemies inside that building. So I don't know if they were just shooting into that for the footage or not. Now the tank is rolling further on down the street, fires into the building again. A lot of people, including people in my family, have been asking, you know, because they watch my streams every once in a while, and they're like, well, how is all this damage happening in Mariupol? Like, are they literally just bombing every single building by, you know, aircraft, you know, like dropping bombs on them or something? Well, here's part of the answer of how they're getting destroyed almost entirely. So this tank has put about 2 to 3 rounds into this one building right here, and it just continues to do so. I think the whole entire video is it just firing into the same building over and over. And so this gives you an explanation of how literally each building, piece by piece, is taken apart by the Russians, with civilians still inside in most cases. Fired again. That's about the 4th round into the building. Now I gotta say, this is a mighty smart tank crew. Let's just look back at what they did right here. First, they turn, let me make sure I get to the right part of the video. They turn the tank sideways to expose the weaker sides of their armor to the building. You know, and I mean, like, this tells me that this whole entire thing here must be a farce, or the Russians are just incompetent as far as how they're training their soldiers. Because you never want to show the weak sides of the tank to where you believe infantry is, and if you're shooting in that building, you're assuming there's infantry in there. What if they're still alive? What if one of them has a RPG-7, or an AT-4, or a Panzerfaust, or a Javelin, you know, or anything for that matter? Why in the world would you show the side of the tank to them? Like, one of them could just pop up in that window, get a lucky shot off into the side right below the turret, and everyone's dead. And then on top of that, it gets worse, because then they literally turn the engine bay towards the building and just start driving off. This tells me this. It tells me that either the Russians are incompetent to the point of stupidity here, or this is a fake video, and they told them, fire at this building. It's kind of empty, we're not really sure, but just fire at it a bit to make it look like there are soldiers in that building, and then turn around and drive away to make it look cool. That's what I'm thinking they told them. This is like silly clown stuff at this point, what Russia Today is posting as war footage. We never hear any enemy fire in these videos. It's like they make this stuff up. But I still show it nonetheless because supposedly it's from Mariupol in the middle of the fighting, so I'm going to show it. But I believe that most of this stuff is being taken in abandoned parts of the city where they just pretty much make it a playground and say, hey, let's film some stuff to make it look like the Russians are really winning and we can actually control the narrative of what's going to be put on TV. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news inside the city, where we're going to see Ukrainian commander give a report on Mariupol. I'm not going to talk through this because there is a translation on the bottom of the screen, so I'm just going to let y'all read the translation and listen to the guy speak, because he's a deputy commander of the Azov regiment, and he's giving a report of the situation inside the city as of today. So here's the video.
Слава Україні!
And I'm going to rewind it a little bit.
Слава Україні! Я звертаюся до західних друзів та до тих росіян, що вміють думати. Ми воюємо з військовими злочинцями, які щодня вбивають сотні жителів України. Тими, хто вбив тисячі жінок і дітей у місті Маріуполь. Ми воюємо з тими, хто збив малазійський Боїнг. З тими, хто відібрав Крим та частину Донецької і Луганської області. Наші військові в червні 2014 року не дозволили окупувати Маріуполь. Це ті військові, які після обстрілу мікрорайону Східний в Маріуполі ціною своїх життів пішли в атаку, відкинувши ворожу артилерію, після чого мирних мешканців ніхто більше не обстрілював. Ви повинні розуміти, що таке Азов. Це чоловіки, які в своїй переважній більшості взяли в руки зброю, бо на нас напали росіяни. Знайте, що в лавах Азову воюють бійці з ампутованими ногами на протезах, з 4 пораненнями. Вони самі схожі на Маріуполь, обстріляний окупантами, але живий, сповнений любов'ю до свободи. Я прошу вас не плутати поняття патріотизму і нацизму. Патріотизм – це коли ти любиш свою матір більше, ніж сусідську. Це коли ти любиш свою землю більше за ту, що дає кращий врожай. Коли для тебе твій народ найкращий в світі. Коли ти захищаєш свою країну, а не нападаєш на інші. Наші військові ніколи не вторгались в Грузію, в Чечню, в Придністров'я, в Сирію. Ми ніколи не намагались захопити чужих земель. Але нам доводиться протистояти справжнім нацистам 21-го століття. Не лише Путіну, визнайте, це не він пілотує літаки, що скидають бомби на лікарні. Не він артилерист, який руйнує житлові будинки, ховаючи людей живцем під завалами. Це робить російські солдати з мовчазної згоди всієї Росії. Згоди захоплювати, руйнувати, гвалтувати, вбивати. Мені б хотілося, щоб рано чи пізно всі ті хлопці, які зараз воюють за Україну, змогли сказати: «Привіт, батьки! Привіт, кохана! Як ви, діти? Тепер ви в повній безпеці, мої любі». І ці слова стануть правдою не лише за умови вашого усвідомлення, хто є ворогом, і вашої боротьби, аби не бути причетними до цього злочину.
So that's the end of his speech. As you can see, it was not really a report on the situation in Mariupol, but more a report of who they're fighting against. It was a very adept report, and I have to say that it was pretty accurate to the situation. And so that's all I really have to add to that. And we're now going to move on to the last bit of news before we get on to a very long video, but I want you all to see the entirety of it because it is probably the most complete documentary that's come out of the city as of a single person's life there in Mariupol. But before we get to that, here's some footage of Russians fighting in Mariupol once again in another part of the city. Once again, I think this stuff is made up because they act like they're not really fighting anyone. This guy's literally in the open with a mounted machine gun just sitting on the ground firing at something. Obviously, if you're in a firefight, when do you have the time or the ability to just sit in the open and fire at something? You don't. So, anyways, here's the video. I love the stuff. I love the stuff where they just stand in the open and shoot at something. Like it's Syria or something. Also, I like this guy's backpack. It says California on it. Yeah, right there. See? California. I like these. You know, wow, these Russian soldiers have absolutely no morals, they like California. I don't know what you could get out of that, but that's kind of funny in a way that the guy's using some kind of backpack that you would get at school here in America. But anyways, we're going to continue the video. They really got that building. They got the walls, the windows, didn't leave anything untouched. They really taught those Ukrainians a lesson. They're really giving it all to this wall right here. There's no doubt that this wall has learned its lesson. I mean, like, they've taken such little enemy fire from this building that the cameraman and everyone is just standing in plain view of every single window in this building. So, you know, I mean, like, not to sit here and kind of like beat around the bush and kind of drag this on a bit, but there's no one in there. I mean, like, that's clear at this point. There's absolutely no one in that building, and what they're doing is just nothing but staged. So I'm gonna check out the comments here as this video goes on, and if everyone wants to move on from this fake and staged video, let me know. But if you want to watch the rest of it, say that, and based off of what y'all say, I'll make a decision to move on or not. Another footage of the fire that they had earlier in the video. Alright, so we'll move on. I just finally saw the chat saying move on. So we're going to move on from this one. It's pretty lame. You can tell it's pretty much staged. So we're now going to move on to the last bit of news. This one is long. It's about 7 minutes long, but it's an incredibly interesting video. It's a documentary that a little girl made of her life from the middle or the beginning of the siege to the time they left the city. So I'm going to let y'all watch this video from start to finish. It's incredibly interesting, and I may add a little bit of commentary, but I really don't want to soil the video that this little girl made of her and her family in Mariupol with my commentary. It really speaks for itself, so I'm going to let y'all watch the video.
Тестуем мосты тут сегодняшней ночи. Нам разбили окно, но внешне. Ух ты, пух ты! Солнышко. Значит, мы в коридоре, вот спим, ночуем, тут вот у нас раз лежбище, два лежбища. Вот он снег. Вот это все снег. Да, вот немножко больницу покоцали. Вот там тоже. Машина сгорела. Вот где-то там наш костер, вот он. Родители пошли гореть воду. Вот они идут. Так, также вот это у нас. Это у нас попала бомба, чимина, не знаю, не разбиралась. Прям в шахту лифта. Также у нас в комнате 11 градусов. Я включила вспышку. У нас, значит, собраны вещи. Вот рюкзак, чемодан. Мой рюкзак, папин рюкзак. На всякий случай. В общем, сейчас 11 вечера. Начался пожар на 4-м этаже. В 10 вечера. Папа побежал за пожаркой. Так, сегодня у нас 10 вроде бы уже, да. 10 марта. Что у нас вчера было? То что-то там снимала, непонятно что. У нас вчера был пожар на 4-м этаже. Папа бегал прям к пожарке. Она у нас недалеко, потому что сеть не ловила. Очень сильно упали. Мы аж сидели прям в коридоре. Не просто в коридоре, а в прихожей. Тогда нервная система сказала мне пока. Значит, вот у нас... Ой, дым, ничего не видно.
Luckily for her, her apartment block hasn't been hit yet. We can see that all around there's nothing but damage, but we can see here that she is pretty relatively fine. So we're going to speed this up a little bit because it is a long video, and I don't want everyone to be sitting around for too long watching it. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of the video. We can see that she's showing around in her room. And now she's outside, and it appears that it has snowed on this day, so this must have been a good while ago at this point in the war, because it hasn't snowed in Mariupol for some time. So we can see that I think it's the mom that's wandering around outside of the apartment block, and you can see that most of the buildings around have been destroyed. Pretty much all of the buildings around them have been destroyed except for theirs, which makes them incredibly lucky that they've been able to stay in their apartment here for so long. So we can see that they still are packing their stuff and getting ready to leave. And so finally, looks like they had met up with some other civilians at some point. Now they're wandering around again. The snow has melted, so that's telling us that it's getting a little bit more recent. We can see in the next part of this video that it appears they are meeting up with some civilians. And so, I'm going to skip to the end of this video, here. And we can see that they made it to a car convoy, and they left the city. I'm sorry, it's an incredibly long video, and I was watching it, but I didn't want everyone to bear through an incredibly long video, so I decided to actually cut it up a little bit. But as you can see, this girl was incredibly fortunate because while all the buildings around hers had been completely destroyed, hers wasn't. And she was able to manage to get out alive with her entire family. So they were very lucky, but as you could tell from the apartment buildings around them, many other people may have not been so fortunate. So we're now going to move on from that. That was actually the last bit of news we've gotten in Mariupol. And to answer the question that a lot of people may have, we're not really sure how long the city can hold anymore. It may fall at any day at this point. We're hearing a lot of news that the Azov battalion has been pushed pretty much to the shoreline, and they're now holding the metallurgical plant and the area here kind of around the downtown area of Mariupol. But I'm not entirely sure if that information is true. But as of right now, that's really all we have. So I don't really know how much longer they'll hold the city. It may be days, it may be a week. I'm not entirely sure. But that actually covers all the news in Mariupol. And so we only have 2 more bits of news to go, and then we'll get to the questions at the end of the stream. And so at Kherson today, to cover the news that we were kind of asked in the super chat earlier, we have seen that the Ukrainians have managed to push all the way up to the city as they liberated 11 more villages near Kherson today. These 11 villages, from what I could find, were all in this area right here, but if you would like to check out this news article for yourself, there's a link in the description to this map, and you can go and click on this news article that I attached to it to show that there is some kind of evidence to suggest that these villages have been retaken on this side of the city, showing that the Ukrainians have now closed in on Kherson, and they're now going to start encroaching into the city and hopefully capture it soon. We're now going to move on to the international news. We've gotten 2 bits of international news. We've heard more news today that Russia is pulling more of their troops, not South Ossetian troops, but they're moving their own troops out of the pseudo countries they have in Georgia, and it appears that they are heading towards Ukraine. This may be telling us that right now they don't have a lot more troops to draw on, and so that number of around 750,000 active duty members in their army may actually be misleading in a way, because they're not able to field them all, and they're having to draw from units that aren't even from the Western Command, and they're having to draw from pretty much the Caucasus Mountains and foreign deployments, and bring them to Ukraine, because there may be some of the few combat-ready units they have in the Russian military that are left. We're now going to move on to the final bit of news we've gotten in Britain today, where the British, along with several other countries, said in a tweet that they were going to provide even more supplies to Ukraine, including air and coastal defense systems, which tells us that there's more anti-air and anti-ship weapons on their way to Ukraine. It appears that they'll also be providing artillery, armored vehicles, which may include tanks, and wider training and logistical support, which is some kind of behind-the-lines signal corps and logistics units kind of improvements, which will help out the Ukrainians to a large degree, because logistics wins wars. If everyone's been around for a long time, you know that for sure. And if you haven't, make sure to go check out and watch the old streams, because I talked about the logistics a lot back at the beginning of the war. So that actually covers all the news we've gotten today. And so with that being said, we're now going to move on to all the questions we've gotten. Before we start, how many super chats do we have, Matthew?
So we're currently sitting at about 15 super chats and about 15 normal questions.
All right. And so that being said, let's get to the first question.
Okay, so first up, we have a donation from a longtime channel supporter, Zeta Lane. She puts in a donation of $50 and says, "For all the souls in Kherson, Slava Ukraine."
Slava Ukraina, and thank you very much for supporting this channel. You have been a return supporter many times, and I thank you so much for helping out this channel a lot. It helps us to continue broadcasting nightly, and it helps me to look into the future and see what we'll be reporting in this channel next. And so I thank you very much for the support once again. It means a lot to me. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have another channel regular. We have trademarks and patents for growing businesses. He puts in a donation of $25. And thank you for your continued support. I've noticed you're on the channel quite a bit, and we do appreciate it. He says, "Great job, Enforcer and moderators."
Well, thank you very much for the support, and I'm glad that you still enjoy the streams. You've been around for a long time, a very long time, since like the beginning of these streams. So I thank you so much for always being here and always helping us out, and it means a lot to me that you're helping out with these streams. And I'm very thankful that you appreciate my group of moderators. They have shrunk over the past few weeks, but I'm still appreciative nonetheless to Matthew and my other moderators like the Watcher, who look over these streams and make sure that everything is running smoothly in them. So I thank you once again for the support. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And real quickly, I want to recognize a $20 donation from Just Lucky, I Guess. Thank you very much for your donation. Next up, we have a question from Louise Salmeron, who puts in a donation of $20. He says, Can you please explain what comparison there is in your mind with California and the Russian soldiers liking a California backpack?
Well, I'm just there isn't really no comparison to be made. I just kind of find it funny that they all like the Russian government always talks about how anti-Western they are, yet someone's wearing a backpack with California on it and they're serving in the Russian military or pro-Russian forces. And so it's funny to me. It's kind of like that thing from what was that movie called? It was made by Stanley Kubrick. Uh Full Metal Jacket, you know, where the guy had Born to Kill and the peace sign on his helmet at the same time. It's kind of like that in a way because they're anti-Western, yet the guy's wearing a backpack that has the word California on it. So that's kind of what was funny to me. But I thank you very much for the support and the question. It is an interesting one. So I hope that answers the question in a way as to what I found interesting about it. There really is no correlation. California is probably the literal opposite. Never been to California, but it's probably the literal opposite of Russia in many ways. But I thank you very much for the support nonetheless. And so we're moving on to the next question.
And next up, we have a question from another longtime channel supporter, Anthony K. Smith. He puts in a donation of $18 and says, Taiwan Part 2. Half of Taiwan only was a reluctant part of a prefecture for 200 years. In 1885, it became a province. In 1895, the Japanese took it. I was reluctantly handed to the Kuomintang in 1945. PRC has never owned it.
That is true. I'm not really sure exactly what that is in reference to. I think you're talking about kind of like the little spill I gave about China last night, and I didn't ever say that it was owned by the Communist Chinese. It's always been owned, at least in modern history, by the Republic of China. So yes, I do have to agree with that assessment. Thank you very much for the info, and also the support as well. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next, we have a question from another longtime channel supporter, BSG Wolf. He puts in a donation of $20 and says, how much danger of attack is Odessa still in?
I can't really answer that question anymore because we have no news at all about the Russian forces at sea around Odessa anymore. We had satellite pictures a while ago that there was some kind of landing forces sitting at sea somewhere in the area that my cursor is circling now. But we haven't been able to get a lot more information onto if anything's happened to them. Have they returned to port or are they still sitting there? We don't really know. And we had a general idea before this this situation we're looking at right now developed that the Russians were planning on capturing Mykolaiv and then pushing over land towards Odessa and then having the naval invasion occur somewhere in the captured Russian territory leading up to Odessa. That was kind of what we understood at the time. And so that may change, their strategy may have changed a little, but I don't think Odessa is in that much danger of being invaded at the moment. But then again, I might be entirely wrong. This is all based on assumptions and public information that we're getting here on the channel. And so that may be wrong. The Russians may still plan to try and base a naval invasion. But the problem is that they're being pushed back at Kherson, and they may lose Kherson. And so there would be no chance of support for the naval invasion force at Odessa, unlike the forces that landed near Mariupol. Because when that naval invasion occurred, the Russian forces that were pushing out of Crimea soon met up with that naval invasion force and relieved them and made sure that they were connected, at least in theory, to a larger supply chain. That would not be the case for a naval invasion force near Odessa right now. So I think they're relatively safe at the moment. But I thank you very much for the question and the support, and thank you very much for being a longtime supporter of this channel. It helps us out a lot. And so that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
And next up, we have a question from Nina Daniel, who puts in a donation of $10 and says, hi, Enforcer. What's your take on the Navy sending Growlers to Germany? Pentagon says not related to war in Ukraine.
Let me make sure that I'm thinking the Growler is the correct thing. Growler. I'm assuming that it's the aircraft, the Growler. Let me make sure that is correct. Let's see. Electronic warfare. Okay, I knew that the Growler was electronic warfare, but for some reason I started thinking about the Intruder, and that Growler. But I don't really think that would be suggestive of anything, because right now it seems like the tensions that were occurring last week have kind of simmered now, and it appears that nothing's really happening with them, at least in the big picture. And so I think that may have just been some sort of like scheduled like deployment for those prowlers to go to Germany. But, you know, once again, I'm not entirely sure. I don't have enough information to really talk about that too much. So honestly, I hate to say this, but I will have to declare a little bit of ignorance on that one because I don't really have enough information about what prowlers actually serve in terms of an actual combat role to give you a really good answer I would be happy with giving you. So to answer the question the best I can, I'm not really entirely sure if that would be related with anything involved with Ukraine. So I hope that answers your question in a good way, and I'm sorry I couldn't answer it too well, but I hope I answered it decently. And so that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
So next up, we have a comment from Not a Teacher, who puts in a donation of $10 and says, "Lord have mercy, how delusional." In that video with the cringe reporter, the guy he interviewed briefly towards the end said, "God is with us and victory will be ours."
Victory is definitely not theirs. We can see that they're losing all over. So I think that guy's a little delusional. He's probably getting fed a little bit too much Russian propaganda, and he's probably not seeing the farmers stealing the artillery pieces from right behind him. So I thank you very much for the support and the observation. Thank you very much for the translation too, because I didn't know exactly what that guy was saying in that video. So thank you for clearing that up for the rest of us who didn't know. So I thank you once again for the support, and we're moving on to the next question.
And next up, we have a comment from TJ Johnson. He puts in a donation of $20 and says, "As always, thank you to you and your team. What do you think the chances are to retake the land access to Crimea and push back to Mariupol in the south?"
I think that retaking the land to Crimea may be a possibility right now. The Ukrainians have been making massive ground in between Mykolaiv and Kherson, and at this going rate, you could probably say if they were never slowed, that within 3 days' time, they would probably make it to the Crimean border. If they were to just continue down the main road towards that direction, they would probably make it there in about 3 or 4 days' time. I don't really know about Mariupol, though. Mariupol seems to be a different story. No relief force has made it there yet, and there hasn't been any signs that the Ukrainians are starting to push back towards Mariupol to try and relieve it, so that may not be possible for them right now. So I think, to answer, because it's kind of a little bit of a two-part question, the Ukrainians making it to the Crimean border? Yes. The Ukrainians relieving Mariupol? Not so much, at least in my opinion, based off of the information I've been getting here at this channel that I gather daily. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers your question in a way. I would go into a little bit more detail, but I don't want to like bore everyone with it too much. But I thank you very much for the support nonetheless, and so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a question from Zero J Kwan, who puts in a donation of $10 and says, "Enforcer, if we have news clips I found on IG or Telegram, how can we tag/link them to you for the stream? Thanks for the hard work, and we love the content."
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I'm glad that you enjoy the content. I'm kind of scared to say stuff about that because you see, I have like 30 people DM me per hour on Discord, and a lot of them do have good information. It's just that the thing is that I always collect information at a certain time of day, and you know, people will like send it in at different times and stuff. And while I appreciate that everyone likes to try and help me out, the thing is that sometimes I can get a lot of information to the point I really can't even sort through any of it. I just kind of look at it for a second and I'm like, oh, that's very nice, and I thank them for it, but there's really no way I can use it. But, you know, I'm not going to say that everyone's information is just bogging me down. There is some good information I get out of what some people send me, and so if you want, you can send it over the useful links section in the Discord server, and I can look through it and see if there's anything in there that I could use for the night's news. So if you want to do that, I think that would be the best option to do, to deliver the information to me, so that way I don't get like bogged down in my DMs in a way, but I can still see it, is using the Discord server. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers your question in a way. And so we're moving on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $100 donation from Stephen Wheeler. He says, "Thank you and keep up the good work."
Oh, good lord. Well, thank you very much, Steven, for the support. It's going to make sure that the channel can keep on going for quite a while. I say that every single time. And I hate that there's like not enough words in the English language to change up the things I say for large support like that. I mean, man, it's really hard to put it into words, but it lets me know that this channel will always be able to run because people like you will help it to keep on going. And so I thank you very much for the support. It means a lot to me. It means a lot to everyone here at the channel. And so I thank you so much. We're going to make sure to put down your name in my head and try and make a mental note of it. Stephen Wheeler, much like everyone else who's gone out there, like Trademarks and Patents, and all of them who have been huge supporters of this channel over time, and Knuckles as well, but unfortunately Knuckles can't donate for some reason anymore, and also Mark Bohychuk, and there's a million of y'all, but I thank y'all all so much for always being supporters of this channel. It means a lot to me, and it lets me know that what I'm doing is pretty good, and I'm doing a good job at it, because a lot of y'all have been supporting this channel, and this is the only way I can keep on making this content, is direct support from the viewers, because I don't run ads on these videos, and I don't run sponsorships anymore except for on one video. So I thank you all so much for your support. It means a lot to me. And so that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
And next up, we have a question from DC90. He puts in a donation of $50 and says, in regards to the now Azov Special Operations Regiment, a lot of people I know have a very one-sided opinion about them due to what they've heard on the mainstream media of the origins of neo-fascists. I have found that most have been expelled. What are your thoughts?
As far as I know, most of the quote-unquote fascists in the Azov Battalion aren't there anymore. They were kind of kicked out after it went from being a militia unit to a unit in the National Guard of Ukraine. So I think that they just got a bad rap during the crisis in the Donbass. And one thing that everyone does have to remember, and this is something I always like to bring up, is that they didn't just pop up out of the blue like, we're fascists, we're just fascists to be fascists. They popped up as fascists in direct response to the communists that sprung up in the regions of in the Donbass. So what is the opposite of a communist? A fascist. And so obviously there will be fascists on the other side fighting communists, because that's just always how that kind of system works. You either have fascists or you have communists. That's why if you look at the Vietnam War, South Vietnam wasn't a democracy, it was a dictatorship, and you could kind of say, in a way, that it was that's really historically inaccurate to even call it slightly fascist. But, you can look at a whole bunch of countries like Chile with Augusto Pinochet, that was pretty much fascist in a way. But yeah, if you have communists on one side in a conflict, I'm trying to figure out the best way to word this. If you have communists on one side of a conflict, you will always have fascists on the other side, because naturally they're not going to side with the communists, they're going to side with the other side. It's kind of like an enemy of my enemy is my friend. But after it became a National Guard unit, as far as I know, that kind of like echelon of the unit was kind of removed from it, as far as I know. So I think they just got a bad stigma, but I don't really think they support that these days. So I thank you very much for the support, and that's kind of my stance on it. I hope that answers the question in a good way. And so that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
And next up tonight, we have a question from BC Skyman. He puts in a donation of $10 and says, why can't the Ukrainian army use Bayraktars to destroy these tanks and troops in Mariupol? Sure would be nice if they could take back the city.
I think they are trying, because we know at the beginning the Azov Battalion was using a lot of Bayraktars from what we saw in footage. So maybe those were shot down and they've run out of them in Mariupol. Or maybe the Ukrainians can't fly Bayraktars towards Mariupol because they're scared they're going to be shot down on the trip there or the trip back. So I'm not entirely sure as to the answer of that question. I'm assuming that it would be one of the two options that I just stated previously. So it is a decent suggestion. I just think that at this point the Ukrainians are exhausting all of their options to try and hold the town or save it, and nothing is really coming to fruition because Mariupol is just so far into the siege that there's really no way to turn it around at this point. That's not a bad thing though, because they've held for so long that they've served their purpose. Kind of like how the Alamo didn't hold for a long time, it was just like 13 days. But it served its purpose during those 13 days. It held off the entire Mexican army for 13 days. So that's kind of how I'm looking at this. But once again, I do think that the Ukrainians trying to send some kind of support via drones like a Bayraktars, well, a Bayraktar or multiple Bayraktars would be beneficial to the siege and probably help them hold for even a little bit longer. So I thank you very much for the support and the suggestion. And with that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
All right, and I just want to recognize two donations real quick. We have two $10 donations. We have one from John Sturgill and we have one from Denali Deng. Thank you very much for your support of the channel. As always, we do appreciate it very, very much. Next up, we have a question from Problematic NA, who puts in a donation of $10 and says, how are 130,000 green Russian conscripts, really going to fare against a now competent and experienced Ukrainian military using more advanced weaponry?
Well, the simple answer to that is not well. They're probably going to go through a few weeks of training, and then they may start using those new conscripts as replenishments and replacements, and the units that have taken casualties inside of Ukraine. And these guys are going to come in, and there's going to be blind leading the blind. No one in the Russian military looks like they're getting experienced or learning from anything happening in this war. And so they'll just be, of course, pretty much lambs to the slaughter at this point. Of course, considering that the Ukrainians are doing so well against what Russia calls the cream of their crop, obviously they're going to do even better against Russia's brand new greenhorns that are going to be sent into Ukraine to try and fight it. So that's kind of my stance on it. Hope that answers the question in a way, and thank you very much for the support. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a question from Richard T, who says he is Knuckles. He puts in a donation of $50 and says, it's Knuckles. The armored vehicles are not takes that was specified. Also, do you think China will join in on this as they were getting closer with Russia? Japan saying Russia is illegally on their islands training. Also, day 5 of DONO for question before.
Oh, he says 5 days of donations. Hey, that's fine. I'm glad to see you back, Knuckles, and I thank you very much for finding a way to support the channel. It helps us to continue to, of course, deliver the content. Everyone's heard that a million times, and I'm sorry, I have to say it, though, because I want everyone to know that the super chats are meant to support the channel. And so I thank you very much once again for supporting it. And to answer the question as far as the Japanese are saying, the Japanese are trying to reclaim the Kuril Islands, which they lost in World War II to the Soviet Union. So, I mean, like, you know, they're talking about it, but the thing is, I don't think Japan will actually pursue it. I don't really think they have the will to do it. And also that would escalate this into kind of a world war in a way, because the Russians would be fighting, I believe, the third largest economic power in the world, which is the Japanese. So, I mean, like, I don't really see that happening anytime soon. So, to kind of answer that question, that's what I'm thinking on it. Let me make sure to cover the rest of the parts of that question right there. Let's see. Also, do you think China will join? China will not join in on this. China is trying to stay neutral. They're weighing their economic concerns more so than their diplomatic concerns with Russia, and so that's why they've been staying out of this whole entire time. And while the news does hype up, oh, the Chinese are about to send aid, they never do, because they already made it very clear at the start when Russia asked them for aid. They told them flat out no, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. So to answer that question, I don't think the Chinese will get involved. And once again, I thank you very much for the support, and also backing up the 5 days of questions that you've asked, and that's totally fine. I would have answered your questions anyways. You've supported the channel so much, and I'm incredibly appreciative of it. And so, once again, I thank you so much, Knuckles. I hope I answered those questions very well. And so, with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And we have another question from Richard T, who we now know as Knuckles. He puts in another $5 donation and says, it has to do with my account. I had to make a whole new account. Please fix. Keep up the good work.
I thank you very much once again. And the thing is that I've looked into it every single avenue I can, and there's nothing I can fix on my side to make your old account work. I don't know what's wrong with that anymore, because I unhid all of the users, which pretty much lifted everything. So I couldn't find you in the hidden users. And so if you were hidden, you were then unhidden, which should allow you to send super chats to the stream. And so I don't really know what's wrong there. There's really nothing anymore I can fix. So I hate to say it, but I don't really know of any fix to it. And I hate to say that, because you can ask Matthew. I've been looking into that for days, trying to figure out what's wrong with it. But there's just nothing that I can do at this point. And I'm very sorry about that. But I thank you once again for supporting the channel. I'll make sure to remember that Richard T is Knuckles. We'll just keep calling you Knuckles, because I got used to that. I think Knuckles is a pretty cool name too. So I thank you very much for the support. And I'm sorry to tell you that, but that through days of trying to figure out how to get you back into being able to send super chats on your normal account, I haven't found anything at all. So thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and before we move on, I just want to mention there are a few viewers mentioning that they want to sort of discuss Chernobyl. And don't worry, we are going to get to a question about that. I have one in the queue relating to that topic. So don't worry, especially Mr. Drain Doc. Don't worry, we're going to get to it. He's been mentioning that for quite a while now. So no worries, it's coming up. So the next question is from JG Merge, who puts in a donation of $10. It says, Enforcer, my wife and I have been watching for 2 weeks and we love the updates. Saw Guardian article that the Aurora Zidvika unit, meaning drones, attacked and stalled the 40-mile convoy at war start. Can you confirm?
I did have someone send me the link to a news article on that as well, and I wanted to include it. The person kind of got a little angry about it, and I hated that because I wanted to include it. But the thing is that that information has come out so long after the convoy is dissolved that it's not really relevant modern day news. So I didn't include it in yesterday's stream because it, that information was supposed to be around like 2 weeks ago or so. But I did see it, and it does appear that there is a decent amount of credibility that these were the forces that Zelensky was talking about was striking the front of the convoy accurately and may have led the convoy to a halt then. And then that also may be paired with their supply issues and the dry rotting of the tires on most of the vehicles. That could have been a large explanation for that. So to answer that in brief, yes, I did hear about it, and that's all the information I've known about it so far. So I hope that answers the question, and I thank you so much for the support, and it helps us run the channel. And so that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
Okay, and real quickly, I want to recognize 2 donations without comments. We have a $25 donation from Kihang Chen. Thank you very much for your support. And we also have a $22 donation from the Doghouse DMC. Thank you very much for your support as well. And next up for our questions, we have a $10 donation from John Rutkai. He says, "Peace, brothers."
Peace, my friend. So I thank you very much for the support. I like the little comment there. That was a nice one. And so that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
And the next one is from Rich Hogan. He puts in a donation of $10 and says, "As always, thanks for the hard work and the great material."
And I thank you very much for enjoying the content I put out daily. I put my heart and soul into this stuff to try and deliver the best information I can, and I'm glad that a lot of people do enjoy the work I put into this. If you do, make sure to click, like, if a lot of y'all do and y'all just don't really feel like giving a super chat, or if you can't, make sure to click the like button, because that's big support for this channel as well. It helps us to get out there further. And also share this channel with your friends, the ones who you think may be interested in this news, because we would like to try and continue to grow this channel so that way when this war is over, we can transition into reporting all kinds of news that is from around the world and giving all kinds of interesting information, and we want a lot of people to be around for that. And so I thank you so much for the support once again, and we're moving on to the next question.
And next up tonight, we have a question from Ashley Hope, who puts in a donation of $10 and says, "Taking Monday to recover is a great idea. Everyone needs a break. Thanks so much for all the hard work and the work the mods do."
And I thank you very much for the support, and I'm happy that you support the mods. They work tirelessly day in and day out. Matthew is probably the hardest working mod and questionnaire that we've had on this channel. He's been at this for, I'd say, a week and a half or 2 weeks at this point. I gotta say, he's been the one who's been in here the longest, and I thank him so much for all the help and effort that he puts into this. And so thank you very much for the support and the recognition of all the work they do. And so that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
And the next one up is from Mark Bohychuk. He puts in a donation of $8, and he says, "This is for Enforcer Matt." And thank you very much, Mark, for the kind words. I do appreciate it very much. Next up, we have a question from Anthony K. Smith, another longtime channel supporter. He says, "Taiwan Part 1. China history goes back to 5000 BCE. China had no relationship with Taiwan until 1683 CE. Taiwan was actually first settled by Dutch in 1624 until seized by Chinese in 1683.
Well, thank you very much for the short history on the island of Taiwan. I'm glad that she could share that with us. Unfortunately, it seems like we got the order of the super chats backwards when we said part 2 first and part 1 second. But I thank you nonetheless for the information. Very insightful and interesting. And thank you once again for the support. And so that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
And next up, we have a question from John G. He says, Ukraine has asked Norway for NASAMS systems. I really hope we send them some. Slava Ukraine.
Slava Ukraina, and I hope they send them the systems as well. Any help is good help, and so if they're able to send that, I'm sure that the Ukrainians will find a way to use it to their advantage. And so I thank you once again for the support. And so that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
And real quickly, I want to recognize a $10 donation from Rayit. Thank you very much, Rayit, for the donation. We do appreciate it. Next up, we have a question from TIIT Saul, who says current conflict is often compared with the Winter War. Let's not forget, although Russia was humiliated and didn't win, Finland lost lots of land.
I could kind of argue that the amount of land they lost wasn't really a lot. Let's go look at that. And I know that some people are like, oh, Wikipedia isn't a trustful source. But here's the thing. I don't have time to pull up a peer-reviewed source and buy a book and have it shipped on Amazon Prime in time for a stream. So fortunately, this is the information I have to use on stream so that way we can get it out quickly. So let me scroll down to the results of the war so that way we can see how much land they lost. The peace treaty, let's see. Finland ceded a portion of Karelia, the Karelian Isthmus, and the land of Lake Ladoga. What percentage of this made up their country? Well, we'll just look at the map. So we can see that that's the amount of land they lost. Not really a large amount. I know that Viborg was included in that, which was one of the larger Finnish cities. But let's just pull up the question. How much land did Finland lose in the Winter War? Let's see, how much land did Finland lost in the Winter War? Ooh, that was terribly said. Had to cede 11% of its territory as part of the peace agreement. So it was a decent amount, but it wasn't a huge amount of land. It wasn't like, like 20%. It was only 11%. Unfortunately, they did lose Viborg, which was very important to the Finns. But nonetheless, I thank you very much for the support and bringing that up. They did lose land, but, still, they defeated the Russians and maintained their sovereignty, which is pretty important. But maybe this war may start going in that direction where Ukraine will give up the Donbass in exchange for them pledging their neutrality and maintaining their sovereignty as an independent nation. But I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers the question or the comment in a way. And so that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
Okay, I just want to recognize three more $5 donations. We have one from City Clout, we have one from William Allen, and we also have one from Easy Shifty, who says Slava Ukraine.
Slava Ukraina. And with that being said, on to the next question.
And the next one is from Muskrat82, who says, do you think Putin will risk too much military resources over Ukraine, with Ukraine still having troops in reserve and not called up to serve yet?
I don't think he will. It seems like the war is petering out in a way. I don't think that the conscripts aren't going to be like a magical miracle thing where they just send in 130,000 troops and start steamrolling everything. Those troops have to be trained. They're probably not going to be the first ones up. They're probably going to be trying to pull on soldiers that are, conscripts that are closer to the end of their 1-year service than the brand new ones. So I don't think that there will be any changes as far as Russian manpower or how far they're dedicated in this war from now on. There won't really be any benefit they get from it, at least in my opinion. And so I hope that answers the question pretty well. And once again, thank you for the support. And so that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from William Arrington. Thank you very much, William. That's a very generous donation. We appreciate it. Let's see here. Our next question of the night is from Shayer BD, who says, Putin has drafted thousands more Russian soldiers. How is that going to impact the war?
It's not going to impact it immediately, and I don't think it'll ever impact it because it looks like this war may be over, but before they actually are ever entered into normal military service, these soldiers do have to go through a training period. And let's pull up how long is Russian Basic training. New conscripts undergo a 1 to 2 month basic training, followed by 3 to 6 months of advanced training before arriving at their assigned units. So about half of their time spent in the military is in training. I think the average conscript's contract, how long does a Russian conscript serve? I think it's a 1-year contract nowadays. 12 months, yeah, it's a 12-month draft. So they spend, according to this, 1 to 2 months in basic, and then 3 to 6 months in advanced training. So at the worst, they're spending like 3/4 of their service in training. But I'm sure that if they needed to push these soldiers out quicker, they would spend 1 month in basic and probably 3 months in advanced training. And so they'll be training for 4 months at the minimum right now. And then they could speed that up probably even further and get it down to like 3 months or 2 months. So, going off of that, I don't think these conscripts will actually make an impact at all because their amount of training is so long that this war will probably be over by the time that they actually get through training. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers the question in the way. We got some quick fact-finding there. Hopefully that information was true. As far as I know, because I did read some books on how the Russian military operates a year ago or so, I believe that the normal contract for a conscript is 1 year now. So I thank you very much for the support. Hope that answers the question. And with that being said, we're moving on to the next one.
Okay, and the next question is from Diffuse56, who is becoming a longtime channel supporter. He says, should we be concerned about the stress and strain on Ukrainian troops? Seems they've been fighting 24/7. Is there a rest and regroup rotation?
I would assume, considering that the Ukrainians appear to be much more put together than the Russians, that they are, of course, rotating troops out of the front and then replacing them with fresh troops that have been well rested. That's kind of been the normal way of fighting ever since World War I. Even in World War I, which mental health was kind of just becoming a thing in World War I, they would still rotate troops off the front line so that way they just didn't sit there until they got killed and they at least have some kind of break to kind of like compose themselves and gather their senses, and then they would send them back up after, I believe, 2 weeks of kind of like off time, and then they put them back in the trench for a week or two, and then they rotate them back out and replace them with another unit. So I definitely would say that the Ukrainians are probably doing that, but I'm not sure as to how much and how that rotation cycle actually works for them, because it could be like they're up there for 2 weeks and then they get 3 weeks off, or it could be they're up there for 2 weeks and they get a week off. I'm not entirely sure. But I do know that they're probably rotating them out and making sure that they're not just going stir crazy up there on the front lines. So I hope that answers the question. Then again, that's based off of assumptions, so take that with a grain of salt. But I thank you very much once again for the support, and we're moving on to the next question.
And the next one is from James Dunn. He puts in a donation of $5 and says, I think the Russians are pulling their troops back until they can fix those train heads so they can resupply them.
I think that the railheads are kind of a lost cause at this point. The railheads and how much they've been damaged by the Ukrainians will take a long time for them to fix, especially under combat conditions, and considering that these railroad construction groups in the military could come under air attacks or artillery barrages, the work will be very slow. And so if they're pulling them out and waiting for that, they may be holding their breath for nothing. I think, honestly, at this point, they kind of are stuck and relegated to the logistics convoys that they've been using for a while, which is just entirely truck-based at this point, and that they're pretty much going to be grasping at like lost hope if they're waiting to rebuild the railheads into Ukraine to supply their troops. I saw that on another channel. They were talking about, oh, they're rebuilding the railheads, they're building FOBs up here north of Kiev, and once these are built, which will just be in a few days, and this was like 2 weeks ago, that 40-mile convoy is just going to fill them up with supplies, and the Russians are just going to steamroll Kiev, it's going to be over. And that didn't happen. So I don't think that's going to happen either. But I do thank you very much for the support and the comment. It's a very interesting one, but I don't think that's going to be the case. Thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is from Daniel Armenter. He puts in a donation of $20 and says, why doesn't the U.S. put $250 million in cash on Putin's head, plus instant sanction relief as soon as the deal is confirmed? We already sent $1 billion. It shouldn't be too much to add another 0.25, especially if it's paid on contingency.
That is a decent idea, but the thing is that while we are supporting Ukraine kind of indirectly and directly in some ways. Putting a bounty on the Russian leader's head would kind of make the stance from the U.S. so hostile as pretty much demanding for war. And I don't think that the United States is really at that point yet, although we've seen that the U.S.'s rhetoric, as far as the government is concerned, has gotten more openly hostile over the past few days. So it is a decent idea, and I think that honestly it would probably work a little, although I don't really know how Russians would go about trying to kill them. But yeah, I could see where you're coming from with that. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope I answered that question in a way, and it was an interesting observation. And so that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
And our next question of the night is from Noah, who says, hey guys, I identify as he/her. I am triple vaccinated. I support BLM and I support Ukraine now too. I'm doing my part and even made a TikTok to help. Oh, okay. I think they're being sarcastic on that one.
I think that's kind of a troll, so we're going to pass on that one and move on to the next question.
And the next question of the night is from Adam Lee Fox. He says, Slava Ukraine, get a grande coffee on me. Thanks for the comments last night and keep up the good work, Enforcer and Matthew. Special thanks to the mods.
Thank you very much for the support. I'm glad that you support our mods as well. They've been putting in a decent amount of work regulating this chat and making sure that everything runs smoothly for everyone involved. And thank you once again. I'll make sure to get a grande coffee for myself. And we are looking into trying to get some coffee mugs for everyone that we'll try and sell soon on a website that we're looking into making. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. That should be something that we may be working on very soon. So stay tuned for that if you would like to get some Enforcer channel merch. But that being said, thank you for the support, and we're moving on to the next question.
And the next one is from Xenocide21, who puts in a $5 donation and says, Slava Ukraine.
Slava Ukraina, and thank you very much for the support. And so that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
And the next one is from Austin Pack, who says, how much do you think constant comms between Ukraine and Western generals / strategists are making a difference? I love the stream and wish you the best.
Thank you very much for the support. And to answer that question, I believe that the kind of like, could you recap that for me real quick, Matthew, to make sure I answered that right? Because I think I may have misunderstood it a little bit.
He says, how much do you think constant comms between Ukraine and Western generals are making a difference?
Oh, well, to answer that, they're making a huge difference. It's not really the communication with Western commanders, more so the communication with the Western commanders' information chain, because the commanders aren't really important, but the information that they are able to possess is well important. I mean, like, it can't be overstated how important the information the U.S. is giving the Ukrainians is, because we have military satellites that orbit the world every 30 minutes or so, and every single time they orbit over Ukraine, they're able to take pictures of every single part of the country and show exactly where Russian units are and what they're doing. And so that kind of information is priceless. You can't put a price on that kind of information. The Ukrainians are able to know exactly what's going on, and they can extrapolate a load from the satellite footage that the U.S. is giving them. So I don't think that can be understated how important that is towards Ukraine's war effort, and I think that may also be helping them win this war and push the Russians back in most places in the country. So I thank you very much for the question, and I hope that answers that, and I thank you very much for the support. And so that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
And the next one is from Mark Bohaichuk once again. He puts in another $8 donation and says, this one is for the Watcher.
Well, I thank you very much for the support to the Watcher. They're a silent moderator. They do a lot of work in the chat, but they're very quiet. And so I thank you very much for the support to them. They do a decent amount of work as well. And so I think that the Watcher has actually kind of logged off for the night, but I'll let them know tomorrow that they got some support heading their way as well. And so I thank you very much once again, Mark. And so that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
And the next one is from None of Your Beeswax, who says, is a relief column pushing into the besieged cities like Mariupol a possibility?
I don't think it is. I think they already tried that before, and the Ukrainians had to turn back because it failed. I never heard any news about the relief column that Zelensky said was on the way to Mariupol about 2 weeks ago. I never heard news of them actually making it into Mariupol, so I don't think they did. And so I think the possibility of that actually happening is very low, if not zero. So that's kind of my opinion on it based off of public information that we've been getting. That's kind of the assumption I can make because it already happened before and failed. So I hope that answers the question in a way. And thank you very much for the support. And so that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
Okay, we have about 3 super chats left, and I want to quickly recognize a couple of donations left without comments. We have a $5 donation from Sun Ray, and we have a $2.99 donation from Michael Donahue, and finally we have a $5 donation from Paul. Thank you very much for all of your support. And the next question we have is from Andy S., who says, can you comment on the rail sabotage in Belarus? I've alternatively heard it was done by the Railroad Workers Union and also by a Belarusian hacker collective.
I haven't really heard anything about railroad sabotage in Belarus, kind of in passing, but I haven't ever heard anything that was actually confirmed about what's going on in Belarus as far as the railheads and such. So I can't really comment on it. I kind of be speaking from a position of ignorance because I don't really have enough news for me to be able to draw a good picture of what's going on there. So as far as I know, the railheads could be working entirely or they could all be knocked out because I really don't have any information to go either way. So I hate to say that I'm going to have to claim ignorance on that specific topic and because I don't really have enough information to give you an answer on that. So I'm sorry to say that, but thank you once again for the question. Hopefully I can try and get you an answer to that in the coming days. And so that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
And the next one is from BSG Wolf, who says, for some dark roasted Colombian bean juice.
Thank you very much for the dark roasted Colombian bean juice. We have been thinking, I'll share this idea with y'all because I would like to see if y'all like this idea. Coffee is a big thing on this channel. Me and Matthew drink coffee now to make sure that we can keep going every single night to do these streams. And so what I've been thinking is kind of like a merchandise idea, is having a branded enforcer coffee, like coffee roast, and doing that as a merchandise thing. And let me know in the chat what y'all think about that. I think it's a cool idea. Maybe y'all do too, or maybe not. But let me know what y'all think, because that's something that I've kind of been eyeballing, because I would like to have my own kind of like coffee line. So I thank you very much for the support. I'll make sure to get some of those Colombian beans. And so that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
And the next question of the night is from James Morris. They say, do you think combat fatigue is a reality for the Russians the longer this drags on? The onus seems to be on the Russians, especially in the east.
I do think that combat fatigue is a thing in the Russian army, because we can see that as the war has gone on further and further, this wasn't the case a while ago, but it is now. There are more and more prisoners and even more abandoned vehicles being found across the entire country. So I do think that is the case, that fatigue is starting to become a serious factor in the Russian army, and we don't really know how their rotations work, if they even do rotations. Some of these units may be on the front lines until they're entirely wiped out, and if that is the case, we know that fatigue is taking a huge toll on Russian forces. But that's really all I can give on that. I don't really have a lot of information about Russian fatigue. We just know that the morale is really low, and maybe that also means that they have a high level of fatigue. So I hope that answers the question, and I thank you very much for the support. And so that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
And next up, we have a chat from Ecom Ikpat, who says, how would the Ukrainian army be reorganized after they win the war?
I think they won't really be reorganized too much. It seems like the current system they have right now is working, and so I think that they won't be doing a massive amount of reorganization to their military afterwards, because the current model is successful. So that's kind of my stance on that. I hope that answers the question in a way, and I thank you very much for the support. And so, that being said, how many super chats do we have left, Matthew?
We have just one left.
All right, and then we're going to actually put a close tonight on the super chats. We've gotten a large deal of them, and I do thank you all for the support. If you would like to send in another super chat, make sure to send it in first thing tomorrow if you have a question, and we'll make sure to answer that question as soon as possible in the stream. So we're actually going to do like our last call on the super chats right here and say that that's going to be the end of them for the night. And so that being said, we're going to answer 3 questions from the live chat, and then we're going to end the stream for the night. And so on to the next question.
And the last question or super chat of the night goes to Diogo Jose Teixeira da Silva, who says, "Rip to the Antonov AN-225 Mira."
I do have to agree. It's a huge piece of aviation history that was lost, and hopefully the Ukrainians can rebuild the Antonov 225, either completely new or repair the one that they have sitting inside that hangar. I don't think they'll be repairing that one. That one looks like it was damaged well beyond repair. So hopefully they can rebuild the Antonov back better, or they can make an entirely new aircraft that will fill the same role as that one did. So I thank you very much for the support. And so now we're going to move on to 3 questions from the live chat. And so what do we got, Matthew?
Okay, so the most highly anticipated question of the night goes to Deb Nicometto, who says, "What is the Red Forest, and why is it so bad that the Russians dig around it?"
Okay, so Matthew, actually, because Matthew and me talk a lot, and also, just for everyone to be cued in on this, we are actually brothers, so we actually live in the same house. Matthew
Big
loves,
shocker.
yeah, big shocker. We actually sound really similar. I'm sure that blew a lot of people's minds wide open, but Matthew loves, and I do too, the HBO miniseries Chernobyl. And while it's not entirely accurate, it's probably the best simple explanations to what happened at Chernobyl. There was a nuclear power plant at Chernobyl. It was the largest one in Ukraine at the time, with something like 6 active nuclear reactors. Reactor number 4 had a critical meltdown and exploded. And when it exploded, it released a deadly amount of radiation across this area right up here in, actually, I'll mark it with a little line. This area right up here, north of Kiev. And a little bit down here as well. And this area is known as the Chernobyl exclusion zone, this area that's kind of like blackened a bit. The Red Forest exists entirely in this area of like the world, in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. And the reason why it's red is because when the radiation spread out over this area, it killed the trees. But the thing is that the way the radiation killed the trees, the leaves didn't fall off the trees, they stay on them, although the tree's entirely dead. And so this is like pretty much a forest of petrified trees that have been petrified through radiation, and they're just red because they've died. And there's no chloroplasts that are still alive in these leaves, and so they turned red. And so that's what the Red Forest is, pretty much in kind of like a nutshell. And I know I didn't explain that well, and I'm sorry about that, but that's really the whole explanation as to what that is, what the Red Forest is, and where it is in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. I would highly suggest everyone to watch, if you haven't, the HBO miniseries called Chernobyl. It's probably the best miniseries that's made on a historical topic. It was incredibly interesting. It was mostly historically accurate, and it was just an all-around good show. I would highly recommend y'all go and watch that, but that's what the Red Forest is, and kind of like the simplest explanation I can give. And so I hope that answers the question, and I hope that puts everyone at ease who's been asking that question. And also, the thing is, to answer the last part of that, it's dangerous for them to dig around the Red Forest because there's a load of radiation just sitting around in this forest. And this radiation has like a half-life of like several hundred years, so it has never like stopped being fatal. And so if you dig around there and you're like uprooting the soil, this radiation is being like thrown off the ground like dust, and it's all in the air. And radiation is extremely dangerous to people and animals as a whole. And so it pretty much makes them sick to the point they get radiation poisoning and die. So it's very dangerous to dig around or do anything in the exclusion zone, because doing that could result in your death, pretty much. So that's why it's dangerous for them to dig in the zone. And so I thank you very much for the question. I hope that answers it. And so with that being said, we're moving on to the second to last question.
And I'll just say real quick, just to add on to what the enforcer was saying, if anybody hasn't watched it, like you said, the Chernobyl miniseries on HBO, you definitely need to go watch that. That is one of the best miniseries I've ever seen. It's kind of horrifying, to be honest, because it's so realistic, but yeah, I would definitely go watch it if you haven't. So the next question we have is from John Gruber. He says, "Enforcer, do you think the humiliation of Putin will cause his allies, meaning China, North Korea, etc., to distance themselves in the future?"
I think they've already started to distance themselves now, especially since China is such an economic, like, what would be the proper term? Kind of like a fishmonger, a money monger in a way. You know, that's their entire business, is growing their economy. And so they've already kind of distanced themselves from the Russians because they saw the absolute economic damage the West will wreak on a country that does something like this. And so they've already kind of distanced themselves in a way. North Korea hasn't really been Russia's friend for a long time. The Russians kind of distanced themselves from North Korea when Russia went from the Soviet Union to the Russian Federation. And so they haven't really been having exactly ideal terms with the North Koreans, but it hasn't been hostile either. It's kind of like it's kind of like an indifferent coexistence in a way, because there are North Korean labor camps in Siberia. So to answer that question, North Korea has kind of already been distanced a little bit, and it looks like China's in the process of distancing itself enough that it won't incur economic sanctions itself. And so to answer that question, that's kind of like the direction I see everything going in based off of the information we've gotten. So I thank you very much for the question. It's a very good question to delve into, and we'll have to see if that does remain true as time goes on. I may be wrong, of course, so take what I say with a grain of salt in a way. And so that being said, we're moving on to the last question of the stream.
And real quick, a super chat did come in after the cutoff. I just want to quickly recognize Michael McCowan for putting in an $18 donation. Thank you for your support. We appreciate it. Next up, we have a question, and which will be the last one of the night, from Q-Man, who says, Enforcer, Zelensky asked Australia for Bushmaster vehicles yesterday. Is there any indication that they will actually be supplied?
I don't really think there is any information on it, because I only pick up on information once a country does say, yes, we will deliver something, then I report it, because if I had talked about all the times there were talks, or Zelensky talked to a nation's like government assembly, the news would go on for hours. So I don't really talk about that a lot, and I also don't look into it a lot for that reason, because it eats up a lot of my time doing that. That I could be using actually compiling the news that we put on the streams. And so unfortunately, I don't have an answer as to whether those Bushmasters will be sent to Ukraine or not. So in that regard, I'm going to have to kind of plead ignorance a little bit on that. And so on that bombshell, it is time for the stream to end. We have reached the end of the stream. This stream will, of course, come on tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, its usual time. I thank you all very much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed tonight's stream and the news that came out. And I thank everyone so much for sending such an outpouring of support to this channel and what we do. And it helps us to keep on going on and giving the news and focusing on the future of what we're going to do after the war. I hope you all stick around for that, and we will, of course, be on tomorrow. So thank you all very much, and I hope you all have a great night.